Intellectual domains have certain moments that are just transformational. That's exactly what brain science is right now.
For me, and for many of my colleagues, this is a final frontier.
There is no other scientific or medical problem that has so much potential.
There's so much to learn still about the brain.
Brown is one of the best places to explore widely and deeply.
How do we develop into what we are?
What motivates you to think hard? What motivates you to pursue your goals?
If sleep is so important, why don't we understand it?
So if you want to solve some of those big questions in brain science, the Carney Institute is the place to be.
Alzheimer's disease and ALS, Christensen's disease and Fragile X syndrome.
Alzheimer's, epilepsy. A lot of these disorders are increasing as our population ages.
Coming together to create a full body of research about something is how we're going to find those cures.
Sometimes in the ICU, I meet people who just yesterday had a brainstem stroke or a spinal cord injury. And when that happens in the future, I want to be able to say that we're going to be able to restore your ability to move and your ability to communicate. And we'll be able to do that tomorrow.
I hope we could cure ALS. And I don't see that as something that's completely impossible. I see that within the next 10 years.
Diseases as complex as Alzheimer's disease really need people coming at them from different angles.
To have that depth of expertise in neuroscience and engineering and applied mathematics and computer science, there are very few places in the world that can do that. And we're very lucky that we can do that here at Brown.
That's exactly what Brown supports, is that ability to be agile, allowing people to go to places they didn't know the research would take them.
And that ability to be surrounded by people who do different types of neuroscience has dramatically changed and expanded how I can do neuroscience as well.
There's always someone that's literally world-class I can go talk to. So you have amazing colleagues, but they're also collegial. And that Venn diagram is rare.
Brown trains scientists at every level, undergraduate, graduate, medical, and in fellowship.
As young researchers, we're the future of this field, so giving us the resources and the time to develop skills is really paramount to moving the field along. That's something that I really love about Brown.
What do you need for your discovery? And who are you going to need to come together to answer that big question? We are now the Robert J. and Nancy D. Carney Institute for Brain Science. There's only one of those, and it's here at Brown.
You hear me? Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Diane Lipscomb, and I'm the director of the Carney Institute for Brain Science here at Brown. But I just wanted to be really welcoming to everybody who's here. We've got representatives from across the state, folks from our colleagues at University of Rhode Island. So this is a real come together moment here, and we're really thrilled to be for Butler Hospital and our colleagues here to be hosting this event. So very, very excited for this. So thanks for making the drive to the Butler campus. The parking is really good. It's always really important in Rhode Island for that. I'm gonna just be very, very quick and just introduce Steve Salway, Dr. Stephen Salway, who I think is well known to many of you who are here. You know, he is the founding director of the Memory and Aging Program at Butler Hospital, professor of psychiatry and human behavior, and professor of neurology in the Warren Alpert Medical School here at Brown University. Steve is, I think, needs almost no introduction to folks who are here in Rhode Island, such an incredibly important figure in driving for care of those individuals with Alzheimer's disease, being a phenomenal physician, also a great researcher, and really making sure that this has just been a really spectacular place to get treatment and care, and being a real driver of national change and international change for the care of individuals with Alzheimer's disease. And I think that everybody would agree that he's been incredibly important. So it's, I think, really important for us, for Steve to kind of kick off this event, which we're very excited about. Again, I'm just going to read a little bit here and then hand it over to Steve. But I think many of you know Steve as a physician, doctor, clinical care, but also he's a tremendous researcher. And as I said, has been really driving change throughout the country and across the world. He's published more than 370 scientific articles and abstracts, edited 3 books, and just like the go-to person to really understand how we move the field forward and how we change the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease. So thank you, Steve, for opening this event. I'm just going to take my seat now and hand it over to you.
Okay, well, can you hear me? I'll try to speak into even better. Well, thank you all for coming to World Alzheimer's Day, the perspective from Rhode Island, sponsored by the Brown Center for Alzheimer's Research and the Carney Institute for Brain Sciences. What an exciting time to be in the Alzheimer's field. And it wasn't always so cool to be working in Alzheimer's research, but thanks to many of you, we're really at a turning point with new blood tests, new treatments, unprecedented funding from the NIH, growing support from generous donors. And we need it. We're engaged in an epic battle against a major disease that threatens the vitality of all of us as we age. Already millions of Americans are affected and many more are at risk, but we're fighting back. It's been our goal to treat Alzheimer's like other major diseases with an early and accurate diagnosis, with molecular confirmation, with treatments started early to slow the progression and preserve quality of life. And I want to personally thank the thousands of Rhode Islanders who have stepped forward as study volunteers, some of whom are here today, for making the advances we will hear more about today happen. You are part of the growing citizen army in the fight against Alzheimer's. I'm also delighted to be hosting today's meeting along with Diane, who you just heard from, an outstanding neuroscientist and director of the Carney Institute for Brain Sciences. Diane has been laser focused on building a diverse research community that puts science into action, bringing new discoveries from the bench to the bedside. She's worked closely, I don't know how she did it, with the leadership of the university and the medical school and Brown alumni to help establish Brown's new Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research. And the university has made Alzheimer's one of the key priorities for the university. You'll see from today's all-star panel that there's a growing community of researchers and study volunteers who have come to Rhode Island to make a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. And it's especially meaningful to me to see this new generation of investigators take the helm at such a critical time in the AD field. We're all in this together. Let today be a call to action for all of us. Join a prevention registry. Find out about study opportunities, and there's a little room on the side where you can sign up for different opportunities. Become a research ambassador. We have representatives from the Alzheimer's Association. They've been tremendous advocates, especially this past year. Become an advocate yourself. Talk to friends and neighbors about Alzheimer's. Become part of the solution. We're delighted today to have David Schenk, a 1988 graduate of Brown University, facilitating today's discussion. David is an award-winning writer, lecturer, songwriter, I don't think you're singing today, who is openly discussing and educating us about Alzheimer's, overcoming stigma and turning fear into hope and action. He has published 6 books, including The Forgetting and a podcast by the same name, and he's written and directed 4 short films on Alzheimer's. David received an Emmy for his PBS special based on The Forgetting. David will introduce today's program and the panel and start the discussion by sharing some of his perspectives of where we are in the fight against Alzheimer's. David.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Salloway, who I now call Steve. We're very close friends as of about 15 minutes ago. You can take my word for it. You don't need to ask him whether he. And thank you for everything that you've done in this field. It's monumental. And I want to reiterate what Dr. Salloway said. Thanks to you for everything that everyone in the audience has, or some people in the audience have done. Really been integral part of research. We can't do it without all the participants on every level. Thanks to Butler Hospital and the Carney Center, and to Diane and John for inviting me, and to Tom Tisch, for prominent alum of Brown, for reconnecting me to Brown. For me, coming back to Brown, or anything that's connected to Brown, is like coming back to my idyllic childhood home. If you know that scene in Mary Poppins where the bluebirds are fluttering around and she ends up at the merry-go-round, for me, it's exactly the same feeling when I come to Brown, except for instead of the merry-go-round at the end, I'm ending up at Caserta's Pizza late at night. But it's the same emotional feeling. I really grew up on that campus not far from here, and I'm always delighted to come back. So this is going to be a short talk, and then we're going to get to this really interesting panel. And I just wanted to throw out a couple of provocative thoughts before we get there. So in just a few minutes, you're going to hear from 4 really fascinating, and just 4 of the many, many fascinating members of this research community that's dealing with Alzheimer's and dealing with it in a new and bold way. And we're going to get into some specifics about why this is a new era, and hopefully you'll come away with a new and more detailed understanding of where we are with fighting the disease and the role you can play in that. But first, let me just say a couple of kind of top line things. And hopefully, I've told the panelists, we've talked privately before we got started here today, that I want them, if they disagree with what I say, I want them to jump in once we're up there and say that, well, I didn't quite, follow what you said there. I want this to be a vigorous discussion, because part of, as most of you know, in science, as in all fields, the way we actually get to truth is to have healthy discussion and even arguments, and for people to put their candid views out there. So I don't want us to sit on formality and just be polite to one another. I want us to say what we're thinking. So what I'm thinking is I want to tell you two basic things, which I think may be a bit of a surprise, or maybe a lot of a surprise to you to hear out of anyone's mouth about Alzheimer's disease. The first is, we have turned a corner in fighting Alzheimer's disease. This is a new era. In my judgment, and I'm not the only person who thinks this, I'm not a scientist, but I work constantly and talk to some of the great Alzheimer's scientists around the world. It's not an overstatement to say that we are now, just in the last year or two, at what I would call the beginning of the end of Alzheimer's disease. Not that we're months away from curing it or anything like that, but to put that in context, this is a disease that, as far as I can tell, and I wrote this book years ago, and part of my book was to do research on how long this disease has existed. As far as I can tell, talking to historians, dementia has always existed as long as there have been elderly humans. So we're talking about a disease that's maybe 100,000 years old. Only in the last year or two can we say that we are in any way starting to win the war against this disease. We haven't won yet, but an incredible pivot point is happening really right in front of us. You're reading about possible breakthroughs all the time in newspapers, and it's hard for the lay public to tell what 10 years ago you read about a breakthrough, and then a week later you'd read about another possible breakthrough. So it might come as a surprise to hear that there actually has been a series of breakthroughs and that we are at a real turning point. It might not even seem real to you, but it's real. We are now turning the corner against Alzheimer's disease, and there's a lot of genuine hope. Not the kind of hope that scientists used to say because we had to come up with hope, because who are we if we don't have some hope to eventually stop this disease? That's the kind of stuff I heard for the first 23 or 24 years in my researching this disease and working with scientists. The last year or two is actual hope based on results, based on these new drugs, based on these new diagnostic developments that have happened, based on this new series of understandings. We are actually turning the corner against this disease, and there is every reason for actual hope. We know where the disease, when this disease starts. That's huge. We know a little bit about how to intervene in the early process of that disease. Long before symptoms begin, by the way. That's going to be a big part of this story. We now even have some drugs that successfully go after the earliest toxic component of Alzheimer's, the beta amyloid plaques. We've got good ideas about how to make those drugs better and safer. We didn't have any of those things when I started writing and researching about this disease 25 years ago. We had vague outlines to some of those things. We didn't actually have any of those things. Now we have all of those things. So that's the first point I wanted to make, is there's not just the hope of hope, there's actual hope. It's actually really happening. The second point I want to make before we get into this panel is that you in the audience who are not scientists, most of you, are as much a part of this next part of the war against Alzheimer's as anyone else that we're going to see on this panel, or anyone who's got a MD or PhD in their name. Scientists cannot stop this disease without us. They need us. They need our understanding. They need our hope. They need our political commitment. They need us to ask questions. They need us to donate money or help raise money. They need us. No disease, no medical advance happens just on its own in a lab. This is not one of those diseases where you've heard the stories of a researcher accidentally left a piece of cheese on a counter and it fell into a test tube with earwax and dark chocolate, and oh my God, there's a new drug that's stopped. That's not how Alzheimer's disease is going to get stopped. It's a gigantic organic community of scientists, politicians, and citizens all over the world who speak and demand advances, and you represent part of that community. So we need you to understand where we are better and to talk about it as much as possible. I think we can analogize this to climate change. We all know, I hope most of the people know in this room, how huge and seemingly impossible an effort to combat climate change is, and how it's going to require the efforts of every single person at all walks of life to be a part of that. Alzheimer's is no different from that. It may seem different because ultimately it's researchers and scientists who are coming up with the answers and the drugs and the pharmaceutical companies, and that may feel very different from you. But trust me, from the scientific, looking at it from the scientist's lab point of view, it's not. They all need you to be a part of that and to help them do their work. So we can all be a part of that, and we all must be a part of that. And finally, I want to try something new. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I try to think of new things that I can say or new things that I can do. And I want to try a little bit of an experiment in the last minute or two of talking about this before we get into the panel. And that is, I want to try to have a moment where we think about how the world is going to be a different place after we have stopped Alzheimer's disease. We talk all the time about the cost of Alzheimer's. We all know the emotional cost, the cost of families, the cost of relationships. You've probably heard that they estimate $200 billion a year that it costs us to deal with this disease on all different levels. But that's not really touching the cost of this disease. For 100,000 years, human beings have done everything that they've done and gone through all the progress they've done with this giant thing on our backs where a significant number of people who get to their elder years, and some who aren't quite there yet, frankly, are losing their cognitive ability slowly. These are people who are in the prime of their lives, who have the most wisdom, who have the best ideas, who have the most experience, who can be teaching us and helping lead us all into a better world, who we've been losing for all of those years. If you believe my contention that we have turned a corner and we can now taste the end of that era, what I want you to do, and I'm going to try to do this at the same time, and I want people who we're streaming this talk over the internet as well. And I don't know how I'm going to do this while actually reading a speech either. I haven't figured out the mechanics. I want everyone who's listening to me to close their eyes for a second, and I'm going to do the same thing. And I want you to think of one person that you know who's either still with us or maybe isn't still with us, whose cognitive life has been diminished and taken away from them and from all of us by this disease. And not to diminish the personal pain behind that, but think for a second about an alternative history where that didn't happen. The person that you're thinking of, I'm thinking of my mom, where that person lived all those years without that cognitive decline, and what, aside from all the joy of having her in my life or your person in your life, what that person would have been able to give to me and to my family and to her community and to this world with all of her wisdom and all of her experience. Think of how that would have changed the world. Think about if you add that up, your person, my person, everyone in this room's their person, everyone who's watching on the internet, their person, and all the millions and millions of other people. Think about that different world. Now you can open your eyes. We are almost there. We can have that world. It's not going to come tomorrow. I can't tell you when it's going to come. But it's going to come. Scientists now believe that we are going to be able to reach that world. Imagine how the world is going to change when that happens. Imagine how much better a world we're going to have. Thank you for listening, and let's get into some real interesting discussion now. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Yeah, you have my wow. So I'm going to invite the panelists to come on up. And I think, David, are you going to take this mic and head up on your chair?
So, yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm going to pull this mic out. I'm going to go join the panel. Rising to the stage right now are Jessica Alber, Assistant Professor of Biomedical and Pharmaceutical Sciences, and Ryan Research Assistant Professor of Neuroscience at University of Rhode Island. Maritza Siliberto, that pronunciation's a little bit more controversial than you might think. Very important Rhode Island Alzheimer's disease care partner, research advocate, and participant. Ted Huey, Director of the Memory and Aging Program at Butler Hospital, affiliate of the Warren Alpert Medical School at Brown University, and professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Brown University. And Gregorio Valdez. Is there any more fun name than to say Gregorio? He said call me Greg, but I want to go with Gregorio each time. The GLF Translational Associate Professor of Molecular Biology, Cell Biology, and Biochemistry at Brown University. And what we'll do to start, I'm going to go up there and sit in just a second, but what we'll do to start is we'll have each one of these folks introduce themselves, not with their titles, because I've already done that, but just diving into what their role is in this extraordinary effort. And then after we do kind of that formal part, we'll start to talk about how that role fits in with what else is going on at Brown, at Butler, in Rhode Island, nationally, internationally, and how it fits in with how you can all join in and be a part of this. So why don't we start with you, Maritza, just because you're sitting there closest.
Okay. Hi, good evening. My name is Maritza, and I am a care partner currently of my mother. As a child, and I also was a care partner with my mother, taking care of her mother, and I'm also I am passionate and advocating for research. About 15 years ago, when my mom started showing symptoms, and we realized that grandma's disease was not done. That's when I knew that I needed to do something. And so I've just wanted to learn as much as possible. And, your book was one of the first ones that I read, because that was like in 2001 or something like that, when it was published. That's when I started. So this is a crazy way of how...
I paid her to say that.
No, seriously, that was... I just wanted to learn so much. I'm an educator by profession, and I just needed to learn as much as possible so that I could support my mom. And little did I know that eventually I would also be facing this disease, as I am at a high risk to get it. But we're in a new era. I believe so. I always held on to hope, and I know it's already here, and there's much more to come. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you.
So Maritza, you're a very, very busy person. How do you spend most of your time in this world on a practical level?
So whenever I've been invited to. I've always wanted to. I love people, and I've worked with my own family, trying to educate them. And again, being a teacher and educator, so I also wanted to connect with other families. I connected with the Alzheimer's Association. Through them, I learned and connected with other people. From there, it's just connections and connections, and I love just talking with people and sharing my story, but also I love hearing other stories and coming together and just supporting each other, knowing that we are not alone, and that there was hope, and now that hope is realizing, and there's much more to come. Yes, so I've been able to sit in different committees and representing, elevating the voices of our families, and those of us who are also at high risk and are participating in research. And it takes all of us to be able to get to where we are, and it will take all of us to get us to the day when we can say Alzheimer's, what was that? That was kind of like one of those weird diseases that afflicted humanity, and not anymore. So,
all right, let's move into the lab. Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, and can we understand what you do?
Well, first of all, what happened with Gregorio?
Okay.
I love that. Thank you.
Right.
I'll take Greg. I'll take Greg. When you told all of us to close our eyes for a few seconds, I asked us to think about one person. Unfortunately, I couldn't help it but think about many, many loved ones, and the loved ones of dear friends of mine that are currently and in the past dealing with Alzheimer's disease. I also couldn't help myself but think about my neighbor, and some of you may know who this person is, Benjamin Cello. He's 101 years old, lives next to me, he drives. We talk about, quite often, about history. He was born in 1922. His time in the Army and World War II, and lots of, it's an encyclopedia, walking encyclopedia. Fantastic individual to talk to. There's no better way to learn than from individuals that have come before us And that's what we're striving for. So how do I fit in this whole system? I'm a neurobiologist. I'm a PhD. I train as a neurobiologist, and I look at the basics. I look at the neurons, their synapses. We have over 1 trillion neurons, 1 billion neurons, over 5 trillion synapses. We know, however, in diseases like Alzheimer's disease, where the pathology begins, and we have a pretty good idea how the factors that are around it contribute to that initiation of cascade that then leads to the demise of neurons. One of the things that I've done during my career is look at synapses, the connections between neurons, those bridges that they use to talk to each other, and basically that are central to all that we do. Storing memory, retrieving memory, communicating with each other, commencing voluntary movements. And I remember about 10 years ago, I published a pretty interesting paper where I had just a very simple idea and curiosity. Can we reverse aging of synapses? Can we reverse it? And certainly, can we slow it down? And so I performed a few experiments in animals. And what I found, using the 2 best lifestyle factors that we know today to slow down the aging process, caloric restriction and exercise, that yes, we can do both. And I performed those experiments as a mean to an end. I wanted to know if that is possible, then it means that there are molecules, that the neurons that I'm studying, those neurons have the capacity to resist aging. And if they have the capacity to resist aging, perhaps they will be more resilient to resist insults that come from mutations that cause Alzheimer's disease, but also other insults. And so currently, fast forward to what I'm doing, I'm just a small cog in a universe of fantastic biologists who are the engineers and hands-on. I'm looking at how neurons who are quite resilient, how is it that they succumb to this disease? Their environment, the cells that are around them, the glial cells, how is it that this environment that they live in, as we age, as we turn the corner, how is it that this environment turns toxic and prevents this innate ability that neurons have to repair themselves and continue to stay alive and communicate? How does that happen? And I think that we made some really interesting discovery, but the discoveries that I've made actually pale in comparison to the discoveries that are now coming out, and some of these advances in the Alzheimer's field, where we can actually clear plaques. We can put monoclonal antibodies in patients, and somehow they get through the blood-brain barrier. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, as a neurobiologist, I had no idea how we were going to do that. And now we can do it. Well, we can do that, and we can clear the plaques. So we can remove that igniter. So there are a lot of possibilities now. It's for us to run towards better treatments and a cure.
So the next person, the person to your right, Gregorio, is Jessica, who's on the cutting edge, as far as I can tell, of diagnostics, which is going to have to be a critical part of stopping this disease. Tell us what you're doing, Jessica. It's really fascinating.
Hi, everyone. So my work actually started when I was 9 years old. I did a science fair project called How Does the Brain Work? And made a 3D model of the brain. It was not very good. I don't have an artistic bone in my body, so I didn't win the science fair. But I got really into the brain, and the very next year, my grandfather was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And at this point, I've lost 3 of my 4 grandparents to Alzheimer's disease. So I always knew since I was 9 years old, I wanted to do something with the brain. And then when I saw this happening in my family, I knew I wanted to do something with Alzheimer's disease. There are days where, there have been decades of scientists struggling to get through things, and hitting walls and roadblocks. And when that happens to me, I think about my grandparents and I get up and I go to work. The work I'm doing right now is trying to solve a problem that is, how do we detect the earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease? So we have these, and they've been alluded to tonight, these fabulous new types of treatments coming out called monoclonal antibodies, where we can kind of target the actual protein changes in the brain that are happening decades before the onset of symptoms. And what I'm trying to do is find ways to identify people in the general public who might be at high risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So they might be at high risk because they're already experiencing some of the protein changes that happen really early in the disease course. And I'm trying to do that by looking at changes in the eye, in the retina, using a machine that you would, a test that you would get at your eye doctor's office. We're trying to take pictures of the back of the eye and look at changes to see if they mirror what's going on in the brain, so that one day we could have, a test in the eye doctor's office that would identify people who are at high risk who need further intervention. So that's kind of my goal, is to stop the disease process before it starts, to get people in for treatment early, to get people seen early so that they can have quality of life for as long as possible.
Without getting too technical, what needs to happen to get to that moment where the test is available to eye doctors and just is one of the tests they give to anyone who comes into the office?
A lot. So right now we're at the point where we've identified certain targets that we have seen that mimic changes in the brain, and we need to make sure that what we're seeing is real, really. We need to test that in a lot of people to see if what we are seeing is actually representative of change in the brain, so that, if your eye doctor would just say to you, you need further evaluation for Alzheimer's disease, we're not worrying someone for no reason. And also so that we're not missing people who actually are at high risk and the test doesn't detect it. So we're kind of at that stage where we're trying to validate.
Excellent. All right, Ted. You do something in this field, don't you?
I do.
Something?
I do. Try to.
Let's hear it.
What I do is I try and fail to fill the enormous shoes of Dr. Salloway as the new director of the program. I've come recently, so I'm new to Rhode Island, just came this spring. I'd been in New York for most of my career before that. I love Rhode Island. I think you probably all know it, but it is a wonderful place to live. I can speak as someone who, a transplant, how the quality of life is so much better, and it's such a beautiful place and has the best beaches on the East Coast. And I was talking to my wife the other day about, when I compare my 10-minute bike ride to Butler Hospital versus my 90 minutes on the Cross Bronx Expressway, I feel very grateful for having made the change.
We're going to do the Rhode Island lifestyle panel tomorrow, so
okay.
Please come back for that.
I'll sign up for that. I'm a convert. Professionally, I'm a clinician and clinical researcher, and I think, like a lot of the people up here and in the room, really I'm interested in developing better understanding, diagnosis, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease and related disorders, and have done that my entire career. I think it's kind of it is the plague of our time. When you talk to older people, even though many disorders, cancer, other disorders are of higher prevalence in older people, I think it's dementia that has a unique, inspires a unique fear in people. And so I think that it is, as you point out, if we can conquer this, it will be, I think, one of probably the greatest medical advance of our time and our generation.
Since you just came to Rhode Island and you made a choice, because I know you are a hard get, tough get, why did you choose, aside from the lifestyle stuff, why did you choose Rhode Island in terms of its research and other resources in this field? And can you talk about a little bit of some of the things that are going on particularly well here, and maybe some of the things that you'd like to help improve on or bring other people into to do?
Yeah, I mean, I chose Rhode Island, I mean, because I think the resources here at Brown and Butler and Kearney as well. So some of it, let's start with maybe Butler. I mean, Dr. Salloway built an amazing program, and that is a great launching place to come from. And I think it's I think, if not one of the best in the country. And so to inherit that is an enormous privilege. And you're starting already from halfway through the race. So that's great. Brown and Kearney, I had heard the reputation that it was a very collaborative place with incredibly smart people, but who work well together, and it has exceeded my expectations. I think that none of us can do this on our own, and I think collaboration of specialists is the way forward, and Brown does it better than anywhere I've seen before, where really people work together. The phrase I keep thinking of as I work here is we're all on the same team. Which you don't always feel in science sometimes, but here it has really been universally everyone is trying to move the mission forward. I think what you're hearing up here, which is that people are everyone has the same goal, and whatever gets us to that goal is what people want to do. And couldn't be more pleased with that. At the same time, they're incredibly great specialists and great researchers. And I think the second part of you said was what could be better, or was that?
Sure. Or if you have a personal, first goal of something you want to accomplish after you feel like you've really, settled in.
Yeah, I mean, their goals, and I think they wouldn't, surprise anyone. And I think the program's goals, not really my goals, but one big one is to start giving these treatments. We've been giving them, well before I came, Dr. Salloway and the rest of the program here had been giving them for decades before. But to actually be giving them as a clinic and as a treatment, I think is very exciting. And I think within the next, several weeks to months, we will start doing that. So that's a goal. And then I think it's the next step, and this is a little bit like the, those public enemy lists in the post office. Once one goes down, two becomes one. So I think that what's our next target? And I think the amyloid story has provided a very nice blueprint to kind of start addressing these other pathologies, which I'm particularly interested in, these co-pathologies that can both are tau, which is part of Alzheimer's disease, but then other pathologies that TDP-43, alpha-synuclein, vascular, that can kind of contribute. So I think we kind of start working our way down the list.
And let's invite the other researchers also to speak about, you guys could be anywhere. These are 4 stars that are here in this field, and there's a reason they're all here. So if you could speak to that a little bit, Gregory.
Yeah, I'll say that. I'll chime in now because I also moved, but a little bit for longer than you. I've been here. It's a beautiful place. I moved from Virginia. I was recruited to the Kearney. I was recruited to be a member of the Center for Translation and Neuroscience. I had a fantastic lab where I was. But what attracted me here, in addition to the beautiful place, I bike to work whenever I can to stay as healthy as I can, is the colleagues that I have here. The colleagues that allow me to do, to do a lot of the things that, there's a lot of residents there. There we go. A lot of the things that I do, that the people in my lab, who are actually the ones that are really moving the research forward, and all the other labs, they collaborate. We collaborate with each other continuously. And so just let me give you a quick example. I was funded by the Kearney to kick off an interesting idea that I and an immunologist, Brown, also had. And we came together. Alzheimer's is also a disease where the immune system goes absolutely banana. And we wanted to address a major problem in the field that we find ourselves in, and that is working with animal models of Alzheimer's disease. When we work with animal models of Alzheimer's disease, they are housed in a very controlled environment. They do not see the absorbing of pathogens that you and I see all the time, that my kids bring to the house, that I have, and when I go to a Starbucks. So I wanted to know, how do we do this? How do we change the research that we do so that it much better mirrors what the human condition is? And so we devised an approach where we actually house animals in environments where they are exposed to an assortment of pathogen. And why does that matter? Well, they have now a mature immune system, which we have. The mice that we study usually in the lab do not have a mature immune system, but now the ones that we do study have a mature immune system. They're surveillant constantly, and the immune system is quite heightened. Why is that important? Because the neurons that ultimately give into the Alzheimer's disease, those neurons give into them because the glial cells, specifically a type of glia called microglia, that are the resident immune cells of the brain, they fail to do their job. So now we're studying those glial cells and their impact on Alzheimer's pathology in an environment that mimics much better the human condition. And so what we're hoping is that whatever discoveries we make are much more translatable. And I am sure that there are a lot of additional discoveries to be made in this field.
Jessica, in the diagnostic world, you're at URI, not Brown, but my first question is, are there people that you work with at Brown or at Butler or in other places in Rhode Island? And then secondly, can you kind of connect that to the diagnostic research world nationwide and internationally, and how often that is a part of your purview is kind of connecting with people in those places?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have history with Brown. I moved here from Toronto, Canada in 2015 to do my fellowship under Dr. Salloway. I was a postdoc fellow at the Memory and Aging program, and as Dr. Huey said, he built something really amazing there. And our patients and our research participants and the work we were doing there was just really exciting. And that was really the platform I used to, number one, meet people who do the same thing. And Brown was great for introducing you to other people and forming those collaborative relationships. And then I kind of got the idea to do the work that I do when I was at Brown and use that as a springboard to kind of launch my lab and my career. And it's still to this day very intertwined with Brown. I'm at the Butler Memory and Aging program 2 days a week, and my lab is there and I work with their participants. So I kind of cross over my appointments at URI, but I cross over lots of institutions. And I think the great thing about Rhode Island is it's a small state, but I think that's one of its strengths. Everyone knows each other. I came into this room tonight and knew a ton of people in here because I've been working with them for 8 years. And I think the sentiment that's been expressed about, collaborating and, if there was one cure for Alzheimer's disease, we would have found it by now. So having Brown as a platform and now working at URI, I've gotten the opportunity to get to know people all over the state, but also all over the country, all over the world, who are involved in diagnostics, who are involved in therapeutics, and, collaborate with a network of people worldwide who are all kind of working on the same thing. And being in diagnostics right now and biomarker development is really exciting. There's some exciting things that have happened with blood biomarkers recently that's really exploded. When I started my training, there were no real blood biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, and it's 8 years later, and here we are. We have these fantastic blood biomarkers. So it's a really exciting time, and I think Rhode Island actually played a really big role in that. So it's great.
What about the nature of the national and international collaboration? Has it, obviously the internet came along and changed a lot of things, but aside from that, have there been any big developments or changes in how people collaborate, how researchers collaborate with researchers that they're not bumping into in the hallway, either through more conferences, less conferences, different type of conferences? Is there anything that comes to mind in that realm, or is it pretty much the same as it was 20 or 30 years ago. How would you characterize that? Anyone?
I mean, I think, yeah, I can start. You know, you have the opportunity now to kind of work with the best in the world on things. So, you know, we, for example, and this was started by the program before I came, but I have this project where we're working with a Swedish group, which is really, I think, either the best or one of the best biomarker groups in the world, Oscar Hansen and his group. But we can take advantage of that, even though they're in another continent and it's a country, and bring kind of what we can bring. And you know, and I don't, you know, again, I think that that's just gotten probably internet and many things easier, but it's very exciting because you can work with, you know, the best in each of your specializations. And I think that's, again, the way to move forward is to really kind of specialists working together collaboratively.
Is that process at its most efficient? Is it at peak efficiency, or is there something that still could happen either technologically or in some other way to foster even more of that kind of international collaboration where you feel like the boundaries don't even matter as much? Again, anyone?
I think I mean, I collaborate with people in Europe, I collaborate with people in Australia, I collaborate with people in Asia. I think the one thing that probably, and it's a boring thing, but the one thing that could probably open up even more is, you know, different countries have different regulatory practices on data sharing and things like that. And, you know, if something's already been done, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So if we can all kind of put our data together, that becomes much more powerful and can be much more helpful if we're all working on a similar thing, to put our data together and you know, analyze grouped data, aggregate data, lots of people, and that helps us move the field forward faster. So I would say, you know, regulatory practices in different countries, data sharing becomes a little bit more difficult. But
Greg, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. I also collaborate with groups in Europe and Brazil, you know, Canada, different places. Collaborations are fantastic, for sure. But one of the things that I have certainly benefited from, members of my group, is that oftentimes we get invited to give talks in places where, you know, it would be difficult for all of us to go to attend those talks. And we're part of a bigger meeting. So just to give you an example, Northwestern reached out yesterday, and I have been running this meeting since the pandemic. So I moved here right around the pandemic, so I felt all those changes. And they have continued with the internet-style meeting. And they bring investigators from all over, not just Northwestern. And so I'm going to give a talk. But it's a whole morning meeting where I learn from them. I will learn from them. And I say I learn from them because I've done this many, many times with groups in Europe. And so there's this exchange of ideas that it was a lot more difficult at the ground level before a publication article comes out. We talk to each other, and then we connect over emails. So to even bring it to the local level, the grant that I alluded to from the Carney, I turned it into an NIH grant, and I reached out to Will Van Nostrand at the University of Rhode Island, William. We talked for a little while. He's a fabulous Alzheimer researcher, and he was a member of the team of that application. And so it just facilitated all of these different exchanges so that I can benefit from it. The people in my group can benefit from what, you know, we can garner from other groups, and they also can benefit from what we are actively doing rather than waiting 2, 3, 4 years down the line for us to publish our discovery. So that is accelerating the field quite a bit.
How can I be better at Zoom? You look like someone, it sounds like you have mastered Zoom and you know how to.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Give me some tips, please.
We can talk later.
Okay. Maritza, yeah, absolutely. Jump in.
Thank you for all of your insights in that process. I recall, made me think of when I think it was 13, almost 15 years ago, when I was invited to be a part, to join the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Disease Network. I remember, I was still very new and I was still learning a lot, but I remember going in there thinking, because I had learned from the research that I had done myself, reading and searching, that there was a lot of competition and who was getting this award or what, which I thought, it's perfectly fine. But if we're keeping information from each other and we're not sharing, we're not gonna move fast enough. And I didn't have time to lose. My family didn't have time to lose. I mean, we were running out of time, and we still are. So I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm gonna go and see what this is about, but I'm going to be very clear that fine, do all your work, but you need to work together. And because otherwise, to me, we're just not gonna advance or accelerate. I like that word, accelerate. The discoveries. And this is something that is impacting the whole world. So we need to work together. And I was so delighted when I learned that was the whole purpose of Diane. And so I knew that I somehow by mercies from the heavens, that I landed in a good place where I could be a thought partner, which, from our perspective as family members and as participants of research, we can collaborate, and that's exactly how it has been. And so Diane has expanded, and it's an international effort. And it's so exciting, and so much has happened that I'm still, it's so hard to put it in words, that where I was 15 years ago and where I am today, and the acceleration rate. So it's just, I'm just, and everyone gets the glory, and everyone, it's just a wonderful thing. And here, going back to the topic of collaborations, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but moved to Boston when I was 18 to go to school. And coming here, it's to me, I love these field trips and I feel like I'm coming. It's like another home for me because I feel very welcome, And it's not that far. It's only about an hour. So to me, it all kind of comes together, and we are treated just as partners, and that's a wonderful feeling.
Maritza, I think you talked about the international aspect of this. Is there more and more sharing of best practices in the care community in the same way that we see science, this collaboration with Sweden and so forth? Yes. My watch sometimes just talks to me. Yes. Out of the blue. Too. Yeah. My watch is going to be moderating the next portion.
Yes, so one of the wonderful things that have happened I can speak about Diane, is that we've also had family conferences. And so this is very unique because we get to connect with the participants from all over the world. And we all have the same stories, and it's facilitated that connection, and also sharing of our stories and what has, ideas on how we can support one another. And, for me, it has also opened up the door to be able to collaborate either through the internet or if I get invited somewhere, I will go and talk to families, and then we all, come together, just trying to organize themselves. And it's just, that's a way of just collaborating and sharing practices, and also just listening to all of us.
Right. So Maritza's in the business of talking to non-scientists, obviously. What about the three of you? Do you feel like you have enough connection to, aside from whatever, you've personally, it's gone on in your lives with your neighbor and your family members, do you have any kind of professional connection with the lay community, and is there a use to that in your own work? Trying to ask this in an abstract way, but I don't know if it's bringing anything up.
Well, I'll just give you a quick example. I serve as a reviewer from many different institutes at the NIH, the foundations. The Department of Defense is the one that really brings it home, because there are patients that are part of the review panel. Right? They sit at the table with us, their family come with them, and so it really brings it home. So that probably is the most direct, because we are looking for that research that, yes, maybe 10 years from now will cure the disease, but also for that research that can make a difference now. Right. We have them in mind, and they get a vote, and we get to hear from them directly what is it that they will be able to tolerate. For example, I'm not an MD, so I don't live in that world. But when I review, and I talk to those families that are in those review panels, it really brings home how the research that I do could be impactful, but also how it could potentially be modified, changed in ways that it would be more beneficial, more tolerable to those individuals. Right. So.
For me, I think it's patience, and I've seen patients all the way through and never would want to stop. I mean, almost all my research ideas, or a lot of them, come from patient interactions. And Maritza's saying, it's very gratifying to hear, how much she's gotten from the research interaction. But we can't do any of this without people like her, like you, volunteering for the research. We can't do our work at all. And I think sometimes, not people maybe think, oh, other people are doing research. Every single person matters in the research, and sometimes you can't ahead of time tell how much. I used to I work with some rare types of dementia and gene discovery, and we would work with families and find things in an individual, which then you realize many people in the country have the same mutation, and it's affecting their then they can receive counseling and planning and things like that. So, and all from one participant, often. Just a thank you to people who do help, work on the, participate in the research, but then also just a request that, everyone consider doing research, because it's, every person contributing to research is invaluable. Whether you're doing a drug trial or observational research or genetic research, none of this, all the things we're talking about that have been such changes, none of it would have happened without participants. So a thank you and a request.
So probably most of the people in this room know, or either already involved in that on some level, or at least know how to get involved, because we're on a campus where they can just approach someone. But for people who are streaming, who say, I'd like to help with research, I'm a lay person, but what would be my first step? Is there a number to call? Is there an organization that'd be the first one to reach out to? Do you want to flash your card across the...
Patient organizations, the Alzheimer's Association that has some representatives here. Other, organizations, I work a lot with the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, which, for patients with that particular type of dementia, they can be a great place to start. Also, academic centers locally. So we're obviously happy to talk to anyone and direct people. But I think patient organizations and then research centers can, if they don't have something for you, they can direct you to someone who does.
Jessica, you want to jump in there, or if not?
I was just going to say the Memory and Aging Program has an Alzheimer's prevention registry that anyone can sign up for online. If you go to butler.org/memory, you can sign up and register your interest in research there as well.
Do you need to be a local person to do that?
All the studies are based here.
Okay.
So, but some of the studies we're running are being run all over the country or all over the world. So there's opportunities to learn about things that are going on through that as well.
Can I say something?
Absolutely. No, you may not. You said enough. Please leave the stage. No, jump in. Absolutely.
And for the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Disease Network, there's also, if you go online and you just type in DIAN, and there's a registry as well. If you know of a family that they have several members who have autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease, you can go there and you can get information, and you can also join that. I have a dream. And my dream is that there's I think every single human, I mean, there is so much. It's very gratifying to be able to contribute one way or another, right? But I think if all of us, every single person participated in research, to advance science, to make, humanity, to make it better for everyone, I think, that's an ideal thing. But I think there's so many opportunities that, please, if you see, if something just sparks inside of you and you see, just go for it. It's, there's a place for everyone to contribute to the science to move forward.
And just to make a tangential point that's connected to that, in addition to the importance of advancing this one disease or all the related diseases in the way that, through that effort, in the way that you just spoke about it, I have to say that, I have to make the observation that's, I think, obvious, but still, we live in a really divisive time right now where a lot of people are rebelling against science and facts. And there are people who are professionally trying to push people away from science. And so to the extent that your dream could be fulfilled, or just part of it, partially fulfilled, every person that gets somehow involved in science in some small way, just connecting to actual science that's going on, even if it's only learning a little bit about it and giving some sort of tissue sample or something, they're connecting to it and they're not being pushed away from it. And and not to get even higher on my soapbox, but every single thing that has worked in the history of human civilization is from fact-finding and building knowledge upon knowledge. So for people to push us away from that, it's just dragging history backwards. And so this kind of dream is the only way to drag us more forward. So the more conversation and facilitation we have between scientists and lay people, we're not just dealing with Alzheimer's, we're addressing these other problems. So
and we're all connected. Every single one of us is connected. And for those people who tend to go in that direction, we're doing it for them too.
Absolutely.
So, you just don't give up. You just keep at it and keep at it. And the 1 becomes 2, the 2, 3, and then it just keeps multiplying exponentially. And we just keep doing what we know to do. And it's working, so we just keep doing it.
We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience now. And while I walk down to find the first person, if any of you three want to jump in on what was just said, to fill the space, go ahead. If you don't, we're just going to sit here quietly.
Oh, threatening us. Well, I have to say, as a lab rat, it is really important for us to know that the public supports us. At a minimum, to know that they have a general appreciation of what we do. Most of us could probably do better financially, while working less, while spending more time with our kids. This is really a slog, and many of us have taken on the challenge, and we're really oftentimes not asking for much. I certainly have been in conversations with individuals. I published one of the papers where I proof of principle, just getting some idea about whether reversal of aging and therefore slowing the aging process can be achieved. And someone asked, well, you've done it, so why should the NIH fund you? So that's proof of principle. That's just the very beginning of it.
Hear, hear. So hug a scientist if you see it. See one. Yes. Okay, sure. Here, I'll walk around to you. I'll try to get a couple in before this is all over.
I'm curious about that Diane study that you were talking about. I'm a Brown alumnus also, and I graduated in '86 and found out that my father had Alzheimer's after I graduated, and now my sister has just been diagnosed. And I've been trying to get into that AHEAD study, and I just got booted out of that. But in the process of that, found out that I've got 2 of the APOE4. So is that something that would then qualify you to be in that study, or is it the other genetic markers? Do you know?
I'm not a scientist, so in terms of when it comes to the genes, the Diane study, I don't want to speak out of order. So,
Diane, I think just the APP and the amyloid, yeah. But we can talk more. I mean, there should be something you're eligible for. So.
Yes.
When you talk about these studies and you say that you need lots of volunteers for the data, how many volunteers? Like, are we talking that you're looking for hundreds, thousands?
All of them. No, I mean, it's being facetious, but I think that many of these studies do require very, very large numbers. I mean, so for example, the anti-amyloid treatments that people have been talking about. I mean, each of those studies had over 1,500 people. These are big studies. So we really, it's rare we cannot find a study that someone can, that people can participate in a study. Now that may, be the case, especially if people are young, or but we can talk about it. But it's always needed, always needed.
And can I just add that in addition to people in this room and people online considering getting involved in this in some way, you just talking to other people about how this is a need and helping to spread the word that anyone can get involved theoretically, and that we need everyone to be somehow a part of this. You, again, as I said in my talk, you're then a part of this effort, which then becomes bigger and even more efficient. Diane, you want to point to someone else? Yes.
I saw it. Well, thank you so much, panel. You guys are, and David, thank you. You guys are amazing. I'm biased, but we have the best research participants on the planet. And Maritza is being modest, but I just want to tell you some of the accomplishments that our tax dollars and the Diane study, as an example, have accomplished. From those families who step forward, and it's not easy to come to a place where your parent and other family members had early onset Alzheimer's disease. And even if you don't find out, because we have a provision, you can participate in research and you don't have to know if you carry the gene or not. But just coming brings you closer to the possibility that you have Alzheimer's and finding out, or getting a memory test. So it's a big deal, and especially with early onset, because it doesn't fit with that stage of life. You have too many things you want to do. But that study has been so informative. The only reason we know that amyloid plaques build up 10 to 20 years before the memory loss and when the tangles begin and the other changes in the brain is because of that study. Because of Maritza and people like her, her family, and other families stepping forward. And the beautiful thing about that, and Maritza alluded to it, that whole project is there's a partnership between the participants and the scientists. And every year there's a family conference. Half the conference are scientists presenting, and half the conference are family members presenting, all in the same place, and sharing ideas. And and building a community. And it's just been a beautiful thing and now the family's doing their own thing, and they've come up with their own ideas about other things to do and other projects and helping other families, and it's just been terrific. We have other people in the audience who were the first person to receive a prevention treatment for Alzheimer's in the world. Rhode Island. Okay, these two people in Rhode Island. We have someone else, another family member, been in a study for a number of years, who helped get the first drug approved for Alzheimer's in 20 years. So just been, that's what participation does. The other thing that I would critique, or I would not really critique you, you wanted me to critique you, we just have to communicate a sense of urgency about this problem is so big. And the data sharing. One thing that NIH has really done right is develop a requirement that data be shared. Data be pooled, data be made available all around the world to scientists. It started with ADNI, the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative in our field, And they built a database that any researcher can access. Over 5,000 publications have resulted because the data is available. Now, where we have a nut to crack is for clinical trials. Those are proprietary, and companies don't like to share them. But the same principle that Maritza brought up applies, because that data belongs to the participants who generated it. It's for their benefit and all of our benefit, and we got to overcome those hurdles. I know there's commercial aspects to it, but so. Well, what changed the observational studies is NIH made it a requirement. If you get NIH money, you have to have a data sharing plan and actually really share the data. We got to do the same. We got to figure out how to get over the commercial hurdle, the intellectual property hurdle, to apply that. It belongs to the patients, in my opinion.
We can do some public communicating on that issue. Yes, where are you pointing me? I'm going to follow you. Okay. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you. One thing that you just used the word public, and I've been in studies off and on for mostly on, I guess, for about 15 years in different places, and I feel that I talk about it a lot. I try to get people to be in studies because I understand that it's difficult to find enough people, and I'm constantly, I'm not in an academic setting, I'm a retired teacher, so I'm home a lot. I go to the senior center, and I go to church, and I go to different places. And I'm amazed at the people who don't know much of anything about Alzheimer's, including people whose husband or wife was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and they're taking a little pill or something, and they're having trouble getting home services, and they're home all the time, and I think there's a lot more education and outreach that needs to be done so that the average person knows more about Alzheimer's disease and therefore may volunteer for a study. People everywhere who say Alzheimer's disease, people find, oh, that's a scary thing, kind of thing. But that's kind of where it ends with too many people. They don't know much of anything, and we need to make our community more friendly for patients with Alzheimer's disease.
That's a great comment, and I'll just say, not to take the heat off of all of us in the professional community, but outreach can be something that you're just having a cousin over for brunch, and you talk about it in your kitchen, and you've just been a part of the outreach effort, which could be even more efficient than our attempt to do it. Sure. Sorry, yeah, and how are we doing? We have a few more minutes. Yes.
If you all will indulge me for a minute, if I could just share my story. 12 years ago, at age 55, I was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. I was working for a global consulting company, and overnight, I lost my career. I was told I had 5 to 7 years life expectancy. Now, I was living in Texas. I'm a Rhode Island native, but I was living in Texas, very active with the Catholic Church, and I'm going to make the story real short. I was asked to help organize a visit by Pope Benedict in Cuba, which I did. And as part of that, I made such an impression on the Castro brothers that I was invited to be the first ever American patient treated at a clinic in Cuba called SIDAN, which treats Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They raised my fluency scores from the 30s to the 60s. I go back every 2 years for a boost up, and I've been trying to tell my story, but every time I reach out to an Alzheimer's study, when they hear that I've been treated in Cuba, they can't wait to hang up on me fast enough, like it's some kind of a voodoo or black magic or whatever. So Dr. Huey, you're the new sheriff in town. Maybe you'll let me come here. I created this. It's a lanyard with a thumb drive for Alzheimer's patients, because I got lost once. It was 95 miles from home. It took them 2 days to get me back to my family. so they can put their personal information on this. I just released my book, Outliving Alzheimer's, My Miracle Journey. And so if I could have the opportunity to get together with you.
Yeah, I would
That's a
love to hear
conversation that
more.
needs to happen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for yeah. All right. I think there was a question back
That's
here.
even the little details. That's a really interesting story, and I would love to hear more.
Good evening. I have a question for Dr. Valdez. You mentioned calorie restriction. I'd really like your take or opinion on intermittent fasting or longer fasting leading to autophagy and the effect of autophagy on cell regeneration.
Yeah, I think I missed a part of your question, if you don't mind repeating it.
You mentioned calorie restriction, and I'm curious about your take on intermittent fasting or longer fasting leading to autophagy, which results in cell regeneration.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm actually agnostic about those approaches at this time because the research is still not conclusive. It's ongoing. We do know that the systems within the cell that allows those cells to clear waste and to remain resilient, those systems begin to fail as we get older. And they certainly fail even more at a faster rate as they are dealing with a particular insult that is trying to damage them. And so we know that. And knowing that, we know that if we can activate cells, neurons, cognitive exercises, physical exercises, those kind of interventions have a major impact on neuronal activity and the ability of those neurons to ramp up, augment those mechanisms like autophagy, for example. Right? Microglia to clear away the waste outside of cell. Autophagy is a mechanism within the cell. So we do know that, but specifically to your question, the research is still inconclusive.
Ted, do you want to jump in on other lifestyle things that we do know are worth?
It's a we focused a lot on drugs, and which is appropriate because they're new.
Bring your mic a little closer to you.
Oh, sorry. We've been talking a lot about the pharmacologic, but there's really interesting work going on in non-pharmacologic, and we actually have a study going on called the Pointer Study, where it's an intervention of lifestyle intervention. So diet, exercise, cognitive stimulation, addressing other medical factors, and we're very excited about the study. And I think there's really interesting work going on in non-drug trials as well. We're doing one of the major ones.
But just to even back up about the stuff that we already know, sleep, exercise, nutritionally, can you just kind of go over the stuff that's...
Yeah, and those are when those data first started coming out, I was shocked and a little surprised. I thought, well, this won't be the effects won't be as big in later studies. It really has held up, so especially physical activity and exercise. It is an intervention that people can do now and does have a major effect. And we have a really good data to support that. Also cognitive stimulation and physical activity. Diet, we don't have time to go into all the specifics of diet, but diet actually having a large effect. Sleep as well, and then also psychiatric health. All of these have been shown to have effects, and it's a really literature that's developed that's very exciting, and doesn't have adverse effects for these. And so thank you for bringing that topic up.
How many hours of sleep do I need to be effective? Question back here. We have another one or two more question time. Yes, Diane. Yes. Okay, sure. All right. Like Phil Donahue.
Thank you. My question is directed to Jessica. I was interested in hearing about the retinal scan study that you're doing, and I'm wondering about how a eye doctor can determine that. Would it be just one scan? Would you be able to find the markers in one scan, or was it over multiple years for a patient? Once it's determined what to look for in the retinal scan.
So thank you for your question. We probably look at different markers. So some of the markers we can look at, and if we see, a change based on your age and your health, then we can say right away from one scan, you know, that's concerning. Some of them we would follow over time. So we would say, okay, since you came in last year for your eye doctor appointment, this has changed an amount that, you know, exceeds a threshold. And so we think we should follow up.
And I'm just going to ask Dr. John Drake to say a few words about the Rhode Island Memory Clinic since you're here. And so thank you. That'd be great.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is John Drake. I'm a neurologist over across town at Rhode Island Hospital. We have a program very similar to the Memory and Aging program. And we have a clinic, and we're involved in clinical trials and a lot of research. And I want to echo the sentiments that have been said here today. I mean, really, there's no way any of these advances could have ever, anything we've learned for the most part, beyond mice, you know, we really have to be able to translate this into how these discoveries pan out in living, breathing human beings. And there's literally no way to do any of this without the gracious participation of folks such as yourselves. Even just showing up at an event like this tonight as you're contributing, it brings awareness, leads to conversations, you know, around the proverbial water cooler, if you will. And I'm relatively new to the field, about 6 years in the field, and incredibly lucky to have landed here in Rhode Island. All the work that Dr. Salloway and all the folks up on the panel have contributed to, and the inspiration of Rhode Islanders who have participated. I work with research participants every day. It's incredible. It's what brings me to work. It's hard work. It's hard work, but working with you all is what brings me to work every day and keeps me inspired. So thank you for coming.
Work harder. You're not working hard enough. All right, I'm going to hand this back to Diane now, and she can wrap this up. But I think the theme is everyone, if you're a human being, can be involved on some level, and that's a very empowering idea, and I think it's also really exciting in this new era.
So yeah, I mean, we're right on time. Thank you, David. So my wrap up is to thank everyone. First of all, to thank you all. I think this was inspiring. It was informative, but also, as everyone has said, I think just so incredibly important that we discuss. And we discuss as a community, and everybody is contributing in such critical ways to the discussion. And if we don't, if conversation ends, then we go nowhere. And so I think that this is key. David, brilliant. such a great introduction, so inspiring, but also incredibly deeply thoughtful about what could the future look like. You know, how can we change that? Just amazingly inspirational. So thank you so much for doing this. Of course, to the panelists, thank you for doing this. It was great. They were inspiring too, which I just think like so much great things are happening. There were so many people that we could have had up here to talk, but thank you all for being here. And then finally, I just like, this is an organization of a lot of different people who really contributed to making this day happen. I can't name everybody individually, but you know who you are, and if I start to do that, but I do want to certainly mention Tara and Jocelyn. Thank you both for that kind of level of organization, our comms team, and everybody else who showed up today to do it, the Butler team for hosting us. And really, that's it. Let's keep talking. Let's keep the conversation going. And let's stay very active. And Steve, thank you so much. All right.
Un placer, muy placer.